Hello and welcome to a new video on the channel. This is a slightly unusual video. It's actually trying out an idea. There are a lot of teachers in high schools and colleges and universities that would love to teach their students Linux, but they're not entirely sure where to start. So this is a plan, and it may be a good plan, it may not be. It'd be great to have your feedback on it. So this is how it works. On the left hand side we have a Linux system. This would be projected on the screen of the teacher's computer. It could be running on the actual computer itself. You could have installed Linux, but most schools won't let you do that. It could be running off of a CD, perhaps booting to a CD, a live distribution, or a USB stick, or it could actually be a virtual machine running on the Windows machine. In that case, you need to make sure you bridge the network card, so as it actually shows up as a physical machine on the same network as the other machines in the classroom. Okay, I'm doing the last of those. I'm actually running this as a virtual machine. We also have on the right hand side, these would be the students' computers. Maybe there's 20 students in the room and they would generally be using a version of Windows. Okay, now the students could also have the virtual machine so as they can actually follow along, but in this case we're going to do it slightly differently. We're just going to have a little play with some commands where we can connect from the Windows machine, the students' machine, into the Linux machine. Okay, so similarities and differences to start off with. Well, as you can see, both Linux and Windows. Graphical user interfaces. Now, Linux doesn't have to be a graphical user interface. You do a very minimal install, you'll get a command line. Very useful if it's a server. There's no point in using extra RAM and processor to drive a graphical user interface when it doesn't need one. But most versions of Linux will come with a graphical user interface. It's just that much easier to use. Well, we can see we've got a login box. I'll just log in quickly. We'll do a comparison between Windows and Linux. Now if you have a little look, okay, they look slightly different, but so many things are similar. We've got the desktop, we've got the taskbar. In this case the taskbar is at the bottom. We're using the LXDE desktop. If we were using GNOME, the taskbar might be at the top. But then you can always drag the taskbar in Windows to the top. We have the menu, start button. Similar situation on the Linux machine. We can have icons, we can have windows. I can open up a window. So let's see, what should we open up? Let's open up a file manager. There we go. Same thing in Linux, same thing in Windows. So yeah, it looks quite similar, doesn't it? What else have we got that's similar? Well, we've got a command line. How do we get to the Windows command line? CMD command. Okay, how do we get to the Linux command line? Well, actually there's probably half a dozen different ways, but easiest way, go to the menu, system tools, and well, actually look at that. There's a command line. There's another one. There's another one. There's another one. Even on this little miniature version of Linux, we've got 4 different command lines. On a Linux system, this will normally be known as the shell, or some version of terminal. In this case it's LX terminal. Okay, so what have we got? Well, this is your command prompt, and I am the user Kevin, logged onto a system called Debian. Okay, and on the Windows machine you can see that I'm located in the Kevin directory, which is inside the users directory, which is inside the C drive. Okay, how do I know where I am on the Linux machine? This is actually telling me my username and the system I'm on. Well, on the Linux machine, what you would do is you would type pwd, print working directory. It prints to the screen the directory you're working in. Okay, pwd, print working directory. So I am in a folder or a directory called Kevin, which is inside a directory called home, and notice no C drive, because Linux doesn't use that terminology. It uses the /, that is the root of the hard drive, whereas on a Windows machine it is generally the C drive. Okay, so some Linux commands are the same, literally the same. If I type hostname, and you get your students to do the same thing on a Windows machine, obviously spelling it correctly. There we go. You can see that the hostname of this system is Debian, but then we could see that from the prompt. And the host name of the Windows system, well, we know that now. It's W764-1. How cool is that? Some commands are very similar, some are the same, some are different. Let's have a little look at some commands which are different. On a Windows system, if you want to look at the files in the folder that you're currently located in, from the command line you type dir. On a Linux system, most Linux systems, they've made it easy for you. You can also type dir, but that's not the proper Linux command. They've made a little alias to help out Windows users get used to the system. The proper command to do this in Linux is ls for list files. And you can see that it shows the same files. They're actually in blue, because blue means they are not files, they're actually directories. So directories show up in blue. Now, that doesn't look identical, because the Windows machine appears to be giving us more information. What happens if we type ls-l? That will give us a long listing, lots of detail. Now it looks more similar. So we can see D for directory, we can see the permissions, we won't talk about that at the moment, we can see the owner of the folder, the group that owns the folder, the creation time for the folder, etc, etc. So it's very similar. Okay, so we have commands that are the same, like hostname, or if you ping something, ping www.google.com. Well, that works in a very similar way. The command is actually the same, www.google.com. Okay, you'll notice the difference in a moment though. When you ping Google on a Windows machine, it does 4 pings and stops by default. When you ping Google on a Linux box, it just carries on going until you tell it to stop with a Control-C combination. Okay, that's it. Another command that's not quite the same. How do we clear the screen on a Windows machine from the command line? CLS, clear screen. How do we do that on a Linux box? A lot easier really, just type clear. Okay, so that's interesting. So your students should realise now, okay, there are differences, but they're not massive differences in the command line. The Linux command line is a lot more powerful though. There are commands that simply do not exist in Windows. For instance, if I type cal, if I type cal, it will turn round and it will say cal is not a recognised internal or external command, program or batch file. In other words, it doesn't exist. If I type cal on a Linux box, we get this month's calendar. If I hit the up arrow to put the previous command back in, type cal 2016, we get this year's calendar. Okay, you can't do that on a Windows machine because it doesn't exist. Okay, some commands do exist which are similar, like hostname and date. Date will show the current date and it will allow you to actually enter a date on here, but we don't want to do that. Okay, date also exists on the Linux machine. Okay, so can you remember how we cleared the screen, students? CLS on Windows, I can use the up arrow on Windows too to bring back previous commands. CLS, clear screen. And I can use the up arrow on Linux to bring back previous commands. Clear. Okay, so nothing to be too worried about. Let's have a little look. I'll give you an example of the power now of Linux. What we're going to do is we're going to create a user on the system and we're going to get the Windows user to log in through the network as that user. Now, to the students, what's the most powerful user on a Windows machine? They all shout back, the administrator. Okay, what's the most powerful user on a Linux system? It's not the administrator. It's actually called the root user, ROOT. Now, who am I logged in as at the moment? Well, it's telling me there I'm logged in as Kevin. But if I'm not sure, I can actually type, who am I? It says you are Kevin. That's rather neat, isn't it? I need to become the root user. How do I do that? SU. What does that stand for? Switch user. Wow. Okay, that was hard to remember. Switch user. I want to switch user to root. Now, to be fair, you don't even need to type root. If you type switch user, or SU is the command, and you don't follow it by anything at all, the system will guess that you want to be the root user. If there was a user on the system called Bob, I'd actually have to type SU Bob. But if I just type SU, it knows you want to be the root user. Okay, it will now ask for the root user's password, which I will tap in. Notice it doesn't appear on the screen in any way, shape or form, not even as little asterisks. That way nobody knows how many characters are in your password, good for security. How do I know I've changed to the root user? Well, it says you are now the root user. We also have a hash. When you see the hash, that generally means you're the root user. Okay, how can I check? Who am I? You're the root user. How can I check where I am? PWD, you're in home Kevin. Well, that's not my normal home directory. Okay, but that's okay. I can live with that. We won't worry about changing directories at the moment. Now, right, we want to do two things now. We want to get all of the students to create users on the system. How do they do that? Well, there's a command that's probably quite difficult to remember. I want to add a user. It's add user. Yes, some commands in Linux are that simple. Okay, now what happens if I hit enter? It says, well, hang on a minute. What's the name of the user you want to add? So it does give you a little bit of feedback. Hit the up arrow, add user. I will add a user called Bob. Okay, Bob. So if we've got a student in the room called Bob, we're doing your username now. You can bring the other students up to the teacher's computer and get them to follow you through on this. Once they've seen a couple of people do it, they can do it very quickly. So what is it doing? The system is now adding a user called Bob. It's creating a group called Bob for that user. It's adding the user Bob to the group Bob. It's even creating a home directory in home called Bob. Every user on the system has their own little directory, which is their name, in the home directory. Apart from the root user has their own special directory. This is a bit like your My Documents folder, so it's kind of creating a My Documents folder on the system. Copying files from etc, well, that's a little bit more complicated. That's a bit like a Windows profile, basically. Now we'll set up a username for Bob. I will use QWERTY, first 6 letters on the keyboard. It will ask me to type it again to make sure I haven't typed it wrong. And I can put in lots of names now, so I can put Bob the Builder. Yeah, room numbers, things like that. Don't need to put them all in. Don't even need to put a full name. Okay. Is the information correct? Yes, it is. So I now have a user called Bob on the system. And at this point, I get all of the students to come up and create users on the system just by doing exactly the same thing that we've just done there. After they've done that, I would clear the screen just to reinforce that one. And I would say, well, how do we know who the users are on the system? Well, now we're going to do a really unusual command. We're going to do a command that shows you the bottom few lines of a file. Okay, and what file are we going to look at? The file we're going to look at is the passwd file, which lives in the etc folder. And the command we're going to use to look at the bottom lines is tail. By default, this will always look at the bottom 10 lines of a file. So we're going to tail inside the etc folder the file called passwd. Okay. Now if you spell that wrong, it's going to say there's no such file or folder. But as long as you spell it correctly, we're looking inside the etc folder for the passwd file. There it is. And you can see the last user to be created, because they're always on the bottom of the file, is a user called Bob. Bob the Builder. Okay. By this point in time, hopefully all of your students will have had a go at creating a user on the teacher's computer. Some of them have got it wrong and everybody will have laughed, but you should have now about 20 users on the system. At this point, when you do your tail etc password, you'll see all the students' names come up, so they're logged into the system. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to actually use a application called SSH. SSH is already installed on the system. Okay, I will actually show people in a video exactly how to create this Linux virtual machine. So teachers, don't worry about it. We'll show you how to create the virtual machine and put all of the software on it. Okay, now SSH is a server. So at this point we can say this Linux machine is going to be the server, and on the Windows machine we're going to use a bit of client software to connect to the server. How can you connect to a server on a network? What do you need to know? Well, you need to know the IP address of the server. How do you find the IP address? How do we do that on Windows? On Windows we type ifconfig, interface configuration. No, we don't. We type ipconfig, IP configuration. There you go. This is when you use Linux for a little too long. That was the Linux command, ifconfig. There we go. So, Windows, IP configuration, ipconfig, Linux, ifconfig, interface configuration. We can see the IP address on the Windows machine, 192.168.50.40. We can see the IP address on the Ethernet interface, that's the one the wire goes into, of 192.168.50.39. Okay. How do we connect between the two? Well, first let's make sure we can actually see each other. Would ping from the Windows machine to the Linux machine. And we will do that by pressing the number lock key on the keyboard. That's it. So, ping 192.168.50.39. There we go. 4 pings, little packets of data, flying out the Windows machine's network card across the network to the address of the Linux machine. The Linux machine is then replying back, because you see it says replying from 50.39. It's replying back from the Linux machine. We have connectivity. Now, we are going to connect using SSH. Here's a nice little command for you. Net stat minus PANT. At which point the students generally laugh and go, pant? Yep, net stat minus pant. Network statistics shows listening connections on the system, and we can see we are listening on various port numbers, but the one I'm really interested in is that one there, port 22. That is owned by SSH. That means my SSH client on the Windows machine can connect to the SSH server on the Linux machine. Okay. Well, to do that we need an SSH client. We're going to use PuTTY. If you don't know where to get PuTTY from, it's free software. Believe me, there is so much free software out there that is so useful for teaching. VirtualBox being the VM that I'm running at the moment, probably one of the finest pieces of free software available and wonderful for teaching. So I type PuTTY into Google, PuTTY downloads page, putty.exe, right click, save link, and we end up with this lovely little program here. Click on PuTTY, click on run. We type in the IP address of the Linux machine, 192.168.50.39, 192.168.50.39. It's already set to port 22 because we've got SSH selected, so we're going in on that port there, and we click open. Login as. We'll log in as Bob. Okay, but before we do the login, I want to show you a command on the Linux box. How do we clear the screen? Students, clear. Okay. W shows who is logged into the system. Currently there's only me logged in locally on the system. Kevin has logged in locally on the system. Okay, now when I log in as Bob, we should see Bob appear on the system. But what you can do, and the students love this, is you can run that command, W, every 2 seconds. And rather than doing it manually, like this, what we do is we type watch space W. Watch will run a command every 2 seconds by default. So now, without me even trying, every 2 seconds, you can see the clock ticking up just there. It's running the W command. As your students log in from their Windows boxes in the classroom, Bob's password, bang, they appear on the screen. So all of your students can now see their names appearing. And they rather like that normally. Okay. I am logged into this Linux box. Look, it says right there, you're on Debian. That's the Linux box. You're logged in as the user Bob. Fantastic. Okay, so what we'll now do is we'll get rid of the command prompt on the Linux machine for just a moment. First we need to get out of the watch command. We'll hit Control C. We'll type exit to stop being the root user, and we will type exit again to come completely out of the terminal. We'll log out. We'll log in as the user Bob because we created Bob on the system. So we'll log in as the user name of one of the students. Just pick a student in the room and log straight in again. Okay. Let's have a little think about this one now. We'll tidy this one up now and we'll get toward the end of this particular video. System tools. Let's open the task manager up. See all the tasks that are happening? Task manager is so similar. May not look similar, but everything's there. Okay. Let's open up the file manager. Okay, there's a file manager. Check this out. The students love this. Right. Where am I in the file manager? You are in Home, Bob. Graphically in Home, Bob. Where am I over here on the Linux box? Or should I say on the Windows box, remotely in the Linux box? Well, I don't know. Can anybody remember? How do we show where we are? PWD. You are in Home, Bob. Hang on a minute. I'm in exactly the same place. Home, Bob. Home, Bob. So if I type ls, list files, I should see desktop, documents, downloads, desktop, documents, downloads, music, pictures. Oh, it's all there. Superb. Okay. Let's say I want to make a folder. I have to go right click, create folder, and I'll make a folder called Apple 1. Okay, I now have a folder called Apple 1, which should show up when I type ls. I'm just going to hit the up arrow because I'm lazy, don't want to type it again. And there we go, Apple 1. Okay, so if I want to remove Apple 1, right click, delete. Sure you want to delete? Yes. ls again, and it's gone. Now, let's say I want to make 100 folders called Apple 1 to Apple 100. Right click, create folder, name. Oh, that would take forever. This is the power of Linux. Check this out. mkdir, make directory, Apple, curly bracket, 1, dot dot, 100, end curly bracket. What this is going to do is it's going to make a directory Apple 1 and then Apple 2 and Apple 3 and Apple 4 all the way up to Apple 100. That's what that little bit in the middle does. Boom. Okay, now that would have took a rather long time to do graphically, but look at that. One little command, 100 folders created. Okay, gives you some idea of the power of the Linux command prompt. If I do an ls, yeah, that's a mess, isn't it? I only want my normal folders in here. Do any of my normal folders begin with an A? No, they don't. So what we can do is we can say rmdir, no guesses, remove directory, little a, star. Anything that begins with the first letter A. Boom, fixed. Okay. Right, that was a very quick demonstration of just some of the things you can do if you set up a Linux machine as a virtual machine, or maybe running off a CD or a USB stick on the teacher's computer, fired up on the projector, and have your students around the room remotely consoling in and having a little bit of fun on the Linux command line. Went through that rather quickly. Probably not the smoothest demonstration I've ever done, but let me know what you think. Have a little look. Do you think this works? I hope so. I think you could go a long way with this approach. And it is fun when you're doing this with students and you're starting to introduce them to things that they've never seen before, and it's actually all happening in front of them. They do tend to like it. Okay, tell you what, one last thing. Let's try something. Going to experimental here. I'm remotely in the Linux machine from the Windows machine. I'd like to shut it down. SU. And then my root user password. So, who am I? You are the root user. Don't let your students get your root user password. Pick one you can trust and whisper it in their ear right at the end of the lesson. Because what they're now going to do is they're going to type shutdown space -H now. No guesses. Shut down the computer with a halt. In other words, fully shut down. If you put -R, it'll just reboot the computer. Now, you can put a time delay there, 1 minute, whatever. Okay. Get one of your students to do this. So from the back of the classroom, they're typing this command in, and you're going to say, right, okay, I'm just going to get Joe over there to shut my system down remotely. Go for it, Joe. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Boom. Off it goes. Okay. That system is now shut down. Let me know what you think. If you've got a few seconds for a little bit of feedback, that would be great. And if this works, then yeah, we can do lots and lots more of these. Thanks very much for watching.